All right, so our panel is made up of a pretty diverse group of both office and retail, and then service providers who are really seeing what's next. And so what I want to start with is, well, what are you guys excited about? What are you seeing that really think has really great potential? I mean, what are you excited about?
I'll start. I think CREtech, just as a benchmark, right? What Michael talked about, the fact that there are 300 people here today and there were 150 yesterday, shows how fast things are moving and how prevalent and sort of open the real estate industry is becoming to adopting technology and understanding how technology is really going to build the future for their respective business platforms. So I think being part of that and seeing all of those ideas come to fruition is a very, it's just a fascinating time to be a part of the industry. So
I think one of the things I'm very focused on and interested in is the fact that in the world we live in today, everybody's a tech company. I don't care what your business is, you're a tech company. And it used to be that there was this sector of the tenancy out there called tech companies. Landlords didn't have to cater to them. They didn't have to do a whole lot with them. But today, where I see opportunity in real estate is the fact that everybody out there has some sort of a tech component to what they do. Whether it's architectural firms where people don't sketch anymore, everything's done on computers, to the fact that advertising has all become so focused on video. And so the opportunities that I see out there are that a landlord can meet those needs, not just in connectivity, but also in the experience they provide, because the very nature of being so reliant on tech makes being stationary in an office less important. Doesn't make having a corporate headquarters less important, but how you use the office space and the experience becomes radically different than it's been historically.
I think from my standpoint, being a retail landlord is a couple of things, but primarily it's the emergence of new retail concepts, and that can take a variety of different shapes or forms. But one of them that I'll call out is the concept of digitally native brands, right? And these are generally companies that start online and start selling through Facebook, Instagram, a variety of different methods. And a year and a half ago, probably you would have talked to them, and if you talked to 100 of them, 50 would have told you that brick and mortar was an important part of their strategy. If you talk to them today, probably 99 to 100 will tell you that brick and mortar is an important part of that strategy, right? Think Warby Parker, think Bonobos going from online to offline. I see here Chris representing with some Allbirds, which I'm wearing as well, but you really start seeing the brands emerge everywhere, and from a landlord perspective, that's really interesting because these are companies that are opening stores in locations where they know they have customers. So traditionally, a shopping center gets a couple of department stores to be their anchors, and then you fill out this space with other types of tenants. But if you think of these digitally native brands, what they're doing is they're bringing their own foot traffic. So we're essentially monetizing on their foot traffic instead of the other way around. And these are brands with tremendous brand following. We did a one-day event with a shoe company called Taft on Saturday in Santa Monica Place, and we had a 350-person waiting line. We had to get security to try to figure out how to control it. So these new types of tenants are really, really interesting and doing some fun stuff in our properties. And in combination with that, the other side of that is a lot of interesting things happening in data and analytics. Because if you think about a tenant and the world, a retailer, the way they operate today is they kind of have two worlds and they're trying to figure out how to mix both of those worlds. One world is online and one world is offline. And there's this word called omni-channel, which no one really knows what it means, and they're all trying to figure it out. But from our perspective, if you think of a retailer operating online, they have a funnel, right? They know how many visits they get on their website, they know how many clicks they get on certain products, they know their conversion rates, they know all of these different things. But then if you open a store, most of these retailers don't know anything. They just know how much they're selling and how many people. So we're seeing some interesting data and analytics plays around how do we recreate the funnel that these companies have online and bring it offline? And how do we bridge those worlds a little bit closer together as brands start becoming less about channels and more about the customer, and we're trying to help them get there.
Yeah, I think I'm most excited about how engaged companies like Colliers are in technology these days. When I started out with my tech company 5 years ago, we were trying to bang down doors, and they weren't exactly sure how to deal with startups. And now you're seeing funds being created, you're seeing teams being created, they're acquiring CREtech companies, startups, and bringing them in-house. I was actually in Toronto last week. Colliers just did a partnership with Techstars, and so we've created an accelerator program. It was just announced, I think, a few days ago. We've chosen 10 companies. They're going to go through a 12-week accelerator program, and Colliers is going to be there to mentor them and help them, kind of curate their product and, get early customers and things like that. And, sitting in the room with those 10 companies from, I think 6 of them were outside of the U.S., all attacking totally different sectors of the industry. It just got me really excited. Like, so much innovation is happening right now, and a company of our size is trying to get involved at such an early stage. I'm just excited to see what, obviously there's been a wave, but what does the next wave hold, and the next wave, and the next wave over the next, few decades.
Thank you. Okay, so there's a couple topics that are broadly discussed, but I figured since we have such a diverse perspective on this panel, I wanted to do a deep dive. So the first of those topics is self-driving cars. So, gentlemen, what are your thoughts on, from your respective companies? What are you thinking about when you think of the future with regard to transportation, specifically relating to self-driving cars, not scooters?
They're great when they work. I think from a development perspective, obviously, the long-term implications of what optimizing traffic would have on a regional landscape perspective, right? So what's the role of a parking garage in office development? I mean, that is something that we think about for our clients as we look out over 10, 15-year time horizons. So factoring in what the real adoption rate of self-driving will be and what a realistic projection is in terms of that coming through our user base and kind of our clients is something that I think you could debate, right? I mean, I think there's a grand debate on whether or not it's going to be a 5, 10, 15-year time horizon, but either way, the implications are pretty significant on from a real estate perspective. So, I'd be interested to hear the developer perspective on parking garages.
Well, since we underwrite parking revenue and then put a cap rate on it, we're pretty sensitive to the fact that we want to see people parking. Look, I drive a Tesla, and as often as I can, I put it in autopilot, and I think it's a wonderful technology, and I think it's only going to improve. I think if I was taking some anecdotal evidence, though, I would look at when Google is looking for space, or even Uber looking for space, all that. I can tell you the number one thing they're asking us is, how much parking do you have? Do you have 4 per thousand? Do you have 5 per thousand? I'm like, we're in Los Angeles, where the city won't even let you build more than 1 per thousand. So I don't know what you're doing, So I don't see tech companies right now making decisions based on the fact that they think driverless cars are going to be here in the next couple of years. Now, I have heard from people. I've heard the head of product for Uber talk, and his view presented at a conference was, if you look at how quickly we went from horse and buggies in New York City to cars, I mean, that was within 10 years. And we don't have to pave the streets now. We have paved streets. So there is a view that if the technology gets there, it'll happen really quickly. It'll probably happen because people will start saying that 16-year-old boys shouldn't get behind the wheel, and it'll come from health and safety. But just anecdotally, I'll tell you, we own millions of square feet, and we see lease proposals from major tech tenants, and they all have a huge parking requirement. So.
Yeah, I don't think we're there yet, but I do think the technology will, once it's there, it will go fast, like you're saying. I actually believe that this will be the technology that has the biggest impact on commercial real estate and real estate in general. If you think about everything that every tenant considers and owners consider, whether it be we're doing logistics studies for our industrial clients, or the fact that there's these massive parking decks and what happens if no one's driving and parking in them. The idea of, are people going to live in town more and walk to work, or are they going to use these cars and not care that they live 2 hours away from the city because they can work in a car on their way to work? So how does that impact location of office? Does public transportation become no longer a factor? And so I live in Atlanta, and if you look at our public transportation, which is not very good, but the little that we do have, tons of office buildings. You can see where the public transportation turns if you're looking overhead, because they're all around that public transportation. That might not matter anymore. I don't know if it does. Maybe it matters more. And so I just think there's going to be so many implications that come from this technology. I'm excited to see it play out. I think major cities, I think we're 5 or 10 years away. I think that full adoption, we're 50, right? I don't think small towns are going to have a ton of self-driving cars driving around and people just picking up and getting rid of their cars anytime soon. But I'm personally excited. I think there's a lot of opportunity in commercial real estate space, and we're keeping a close eye on it.
I was just going to say, I'd want to have optionality in terms of how I'm looking at a development, both from an occupier perspective as well as an owner perspective, with regards to all the infrastructure that would be impacted by that, right? And that's clearly something that's happening. And smart
Our
owners
friends
are thinking
at
about that.
Hudson Pacific, who just did a project here in the Arts District, built a parking garage that can be converted to office. So I think people, when they are building today, are looking at the fact that at some point, having 2 or 3 or 4 per thousand is probably not going to be needed.
What's also interesting there is like just the subscription-based transportation, right? Like, I mean, think about how many of your employees are doing MSAs with Uber, MSAs with Lyft, how many people are going to be taking Lime or Bird, right? Like, what's the impact, again, on parking and parking ratios? So whether or not the full adoption of automated driving happens, you think that overall demand is going to be headed down over the next couple
I
years.
want to disclose, I take an Uber to work every day, so I might be a little bit ahead of the change here, but I still think it's going to happen soon.
Yeah, and our perspective is a little bit different, right? Because we're not thinking commercial, and we don't have to have parking lots for office tenants to be able to close a deal, but we do need to have sufficient parking to make it really easy for people to come to our centers. So 2 things that I think are interesting. One is a very long term, which is the self-driving cars, which for us, just to give some scale around this, we have about 50 million square feet of retail today. And on top of that, we probably have another between 10 and 30 million square feet of parking. So if our requirements changed because people no longer need that parking, the economic opportunity for us is gigantic. The second piece is what we were talking about, that it's already happening today. I think people tend to think about it very much in the future, but the advent of Uber, Lyft, I think the rise now of Lime, Bird, etc., we're already starting to see some of the parking lots that used to be very full a little bit less full. So for us is how to get analytics to talk to the cities to be able to tell them, like, hey, we don't need the amount of parking that you're requiring us to have because people are not using it anymore. There's all sorts of solutions. So how do we get that data to support the arguments so we can maybe say, all right, well, 10% of this parking lot you can now develop. Well, great. Now we have options to think about what we can do with that space.
Well, on that point, and one data point doesn't make a trend, but I think there's a big generational difference happening too. We had a very large tenant that I met with the senior managing partner, and his statement to me was, Chris, if you want to renew us, we need more parking. We need more parking. Absolutely, we want to have it for the term, for the next 15 years. And then we talked to the office manager, and she says, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Only 50% of our people park here, and we have to pay for all these spaces. So, as I said, one data point doesn't make a trend, but I do think it's a generational difference.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. All right. So the next topic is serviced office, flexible workspace. How many people have worked in a flexible serviced office? So WeWork, Industrious. Wow, that's a lot of people. Okay, so it has the potential to change the way that the general market works. Obviously, players like WeWork have raised a tremendous amount of capital and are expanding globally. Interested in your thoughts.
I seem to be going first on all these, so I'll keep up the trend. A couple of things. I mean, so from an occupier perspective, I think ideally you'd have infinite renewals with a fixed cost to renew and optimal flexibility around your business plan, right? So who doesn't want that? But the balance there that you have to play out both from a landlord perspective and a tenant perspective is what's the capital required, and how's that return on invested capital going to be recouped from the landlord through the rent, and how does that interplay with term from a tenant's perspective? So it's appealing, in terms of a commercial model to tenants, and I think the service providers have recognized that there's not just a startup market, there's a real enterprise market that they can go after. the hot money that's come into that sector, I mean, hot money can be scorched earth when it moves out. And it's, from a financial perspective, you can't grow faster than GDP forever, right? You'll consume the entire economy, the global economy. So I guess I wonder at the core, what really is the business model? And they're making the case that it's really around data, it's really around technology, it's not a real estate play, or some of them are. And I will tell you, I mean, to sort of give some reinforcement to that pitch, it's frequent that I'm in pitches with clients, and they're very focused on understanding how their users are interacting with the real estate that they either own or lease, and how satisfied they are with that overall experience. So there are certain things that I think the service providers have really sort of tapped into. There's certain dimensions that they've tapped into that reflect kind of the consumerization of real estate that are, regardless of the hot money and kind of the trend and the headlines, I think are real long-term traits that we'll have to extrapolate as a provider for our clients, and one that, there's definitely some innate value in terms of the platforms, these service providers.
I think we're maybe a little bit more bullish in terms of, while obviously it can't grow at these rates forever, but if you look at the market penetration of the overall office space to what co-working now entails, it's still a fraction. It's still a very, very small piece. So, and it's such a large market, right? So the potential for it to go from 2% or whatever the number is, don't quote me, to 10% or 5%, just that in of its own creates a tremendous amount of things. Now, from a customer standpoint, it's interesting to think about. Everything in most companies these days is getting specialized and outsourced, right? You no longer host your own servers. In many cases, you don't even do your own HR. In many cases, everything is getting specialized. Yet, most companies still deal with their own infrastructure, their own, creating the office space, signing the lease, going through that whole process. So the concept that will get specialized, and in part of it, by no means all of it or nearly all of it, but part of it gets created and outsourced, I think it's there. And look, it's obviously there. The question is how big, right? Which no one really knows. And from our perspective as, again, owner of regional shopping centers, we just announced a deal with a co-working space called Industrious that we're really excited about, and we're actively looking to see how many we can build. We think that the ability to be in a space where you have all sorts of restaurants, easy parking, and a variety of different things is pretty appealing. From our standpoint, what makes it so appealing is, number one, the density that co-working can bring. So for us, what I want is, obviously I want to make rents, but I want as many people as possible, because those people are going to go and eat at my restaurants and shop in my stores and use my services. So a co-working space is a lot denser than a traditional office. So I can make more rents, make more money, and make it denser by adding those people, combined with, if you find the right co-working partner, because the types of people that rent from WeWork versus Industrious versus Spaces, et cetera, are different. So I think landlords would be smart to make sure they understand the demographics of the companies they're partnering with, because those are the demographics that they're going to have in their properties.
Well, my father has a saying that he's been around long enough to see what was not supposed to happen again and again and again. So I think we've been here. I think the advantage that WeWork brought was they were the first co-working to bring technology and use it in a way that was really a way to fill space. I think there's a fundamental problem with the business. I think ultimately there's going to be a couple winners and there's going to be a whole lot of losers. But any business that runs on this arbitrage, I'm sorry, sometime the music is going to stop and they're going to be the underside of this. And it's just, history has proven it. Now, WeWork may have such a strong balance sheet that they can get through a downturn and they're diversified. But just getting into the enterprise business, I mean, they're doing that because the lenders have told us we can't do 3-year deals. So then they go do a 10-year deal and then do 3-year deals underneath that. Well, at some point, lenders are going to go, we're tired of WeWork credit. We're not going to allow you to bring a WeWork in. And we're worried about the industry. And I think landlords are going to adapt. And you're going to see more and more landlords either buy or partner, if they don't want to do it themselves, with groups to, fit that need in a building. You take 1 million square feet. of a building and you say, you know, we need to really have 20 to 60,000 square feet that's a co-working with maybe another 100,000 square feet that is 3-year deals. But, you know, if we're going to continue to give 100 to 150 bucks a square foot, they're not going to do that for 3-year deals because the math doesn't work. So my view is I think WeWork has found a spot in the market in a period of time where technology has really differentiated them. There's a few others that are there. Certain big landlords have made a very smart, probably strategic decision to say we're going to partner with them and do it. But the music's going to stop, and it's going to be very ugly for a lot of landlords. And I'll just tell you, because there is a huge amount of capital that WeWork and other competitors have with landlords in letters of credit that are not going anywhere, and those landlords are just waiting to take that space over if something goes wrong. So there'll be a hiccup. I can't tell you it's going to play out. Maybe WeWork has got so much money they can get through it, but there's a whole lot of destruction coming in my mind.
Yeah, I think WeWork has so much money that that they're not going away. So a little bit different of an opinion. SoftBank has billions of dollars invested in them. They have very, very deep pockets, deeper than probably all of our competitors combined in just a fund that they have. So I think that they're not going to allow their multi-billion-dollar investment to go anywhere. I think they're going to hit hard times when it comes to a downturn. A lot of their space, their number one space is a one-man suite, right? Well, that's a nice to have. They're going to go back to their house and work out of their house, and they're going to have a lot of empty space, and they're going to have to figure out a way to move forward. But I don't think they're going to go away. I think that, I work out of a WeWork. My team is expanding, and we needed the flexibility to have extra space. So we decided to sign a short-term lease and use that extra space while we're growing. And then once we figure out, when we feel comfortable signing a longer-term lease, we're going to do that or go back into one of Colliers' offices. I actually think that WeWork is just getting started. They are using these co-working spaces as a test ground. Who better to test out things on a bunch of startups who are testing out things on other people? If you test something and it doesn't work, they're the most forgiving tenants that you could possibly ever have, right? And they're finding things that are working, and they're going to continue to look at enterprise. They're announcing they're doing kind of middle market brokerage, and they're going to expand all of those services to everybody over time. And I think it's a big threat to brokerage firms. I think it's a big threat to owners. I think there are ways to partner with them. We're trying to do that at Colliers, and we're excited about the things that we are doing with them. But I think that it's something that it's not going away, and I think it's going to have a big impact. And I think more and more companies are going to want that flexibility, and landlords are either going to have, and creditors are going to have to adjust, and it's going to be the new normal, or the tenants are going to leave and go somewhere else where they can.
I would just add, and you can close out, but I think we could debate the merits of the business model. I don't think what you can debate at this point is how the approach to the user experience from WeWork's perspective has resonated with the talent. And for our clients, it's about getting talent to a location and drawing talent. And as long as that war for talent is going on and what WeWork's doing resonates with that talent base, I think there's some level of credibility in their business model, regardless of the economics. I personally, regardless of SoftBank's Vision Fund, I question some of the investments that and the methodologies that I've seen in that space, and I think there's pros and cons to having hot money, right? It pushes you to expand very quickly, and that can be a distraction to some of the core attributes of what really works for that model.
And WeWork might not win. They might change the legacy companies to react and figure out things that are working for them, and they might lose to a company that's been around for 100 years. I just think they're on the forefront and changing the way that tenants and users, as I think we're starting to call them, are viewing their relationship with their landlord. And I think we mentioned this before the panel, you're starting to change the way you view your tenants, right? They're your customers, not your just tenants or your clients. And you're providing different services for them. And I think they're just catching on to that wave of change and saying, okay, we're taking advantage of it, and other landlords are responding.
And the last thing I'll say is, look, whether WeWork's valuation and amount of money they've raised is appropriate or not, I think no one knows, probably not even the people that put the money there, but look, they're not dumb. That being said, that doesn't make them means they're right either. I think there's a fundamental truth here, which is the product market fit is there. The question now is how big is that market going to be, because it's a new market and it's within a gigantic market. But the fact that people are interested in ready-to-go space that has short-term leases that have pretty nice amenities, I think that's a fact that's not going away. The question is, how big is that going to be? And that's going to determine whether the people at WeWork were right or not. And the last thing that just a couple of people mentioned, the downturn. It's interesting because none of these companies have ever gone through a downturn, right? Like they've just been keep going boom and et cetera. Now, that being said, Regus, which provides short-term space, and it's the WeWork before the WeWork, has been through several downturns. If you look at the data, it actually shows that their vacancies don't increase. I guess their fill rate doesn't drop that much during the rate. It's actually quite resistant to downturns. Now, that was when it was much smaller. Now there's a lot more, so I don't know if
they've also had a couple bankruptcies.
Fair, but that's probably not because of the downturns, right? That's because their model was broken for other reasons.
Yeah.
But anyway, some interesting data points.
Yeah.
You make a really good point about the cyclical nature of the business and then also where these companies started. I think something that is applicable to many companies in the room is the fact that many of them were started within the last 10 years. And so we saw a lot of new companies emerge from a down cycle. Now we are we are continuing to surprise in terms of how long the market can continue with its upward trajectory. And to the extent that the market will change, there could be a massive opportunity for additional innovation within our space. Think about a lot of people who are doing incredibly well and then decided to step out of their current role to support a new project or new initiative they've always wanted to do but never had the time because they were doing so well in their current role. I'm frankly really excited about that. So we had some direct questions lined up for the folks, but we're coming to the end of our time. So I'm going to ask for closing remarks, just general thoughts about what's happening going forward, or if you want to speak to your individual remarks, you're welcome to do so, but you only have a minute. So please.
We were going to talk about tenant engagement apps, so yeah. I'll stick with what I was supposed to talk about. I think this is, and it started to come up with this user experience when people are coming into a building, and we're no longer just providing them space, we're providing them an experience. And so we actually have formed a partnership with a technology company as well as a landlord to build an engagement platform. It's starting to be piloted. I think these things are going to become pretty commonplace over the next few years. I am a little worried about adoption. Like, how do you get people to download the app? How do you get them to open it up? I think I think at the end of the day, it's probably going to have to be somewhere around access. How do you get into the building? How do you get into the parking deck to get people to actually use the app and then start understanding why it's important? But just another thing that we're definitely monitoring and trying to figure out ways that Colliers can lead the way on engagement apps.
I think for us, just to try to talk to something that most people have probably seen in the news is this notion of the retail apocalypse, right? That retail is ending and no one will ever leave their homes again and do anything fun except shop on Amazon. But the reality is that the business is transforming itself, right? And we'd be foolish to not recognize the threat and adapt. But I think what people fail to see is that retail is a business that has been adapting itself for 5,000 years. And from our perspective now, the big difference now is you always want to have the right real estate. These days, you really, really want to have the right real estate. I think we're lucky at Macerich that our the people leading the company have had the vision in the last 10, 20 years to really focus only on prime real estate. And now we're really changing the focus to how to make sure we optimize that prime real estate to what people want to do these days. The reality is that some of the retails that we're not doing that great, having issues, is not necessarily a bad thing, right? It allows us to churn faster through the retailers that are not doing well and bring exciting new concepts that people want to see. So from our perspective, it's been a hard 2 years in retail, but we are incredibly bullish with everything that we see happening everywhere. And we actually think that this downturn in retail has been a good thing for our business and will only help us thrive even more in the future.
So I think we've talked about some pretty interesting things. Within our firm, we've spent a lot of time and resources thinking about the progression of contracts. Real estate is, a pretty old school industry. There's a lot of documentation around counterparty transactions, and the artificial intelligence enabled power that can come and sort of grab that unstructured data, turn it into structured data, and then really allow thought leadership through our people to perform analytics around that data and visualize that data. A lot of what you've kind of seen in the new era of these companies, right? Like they've been sort of data first. They've not had to go through the unstructured to structured process as much as some of the older sort of legacy firms. But speeding that up and really enabling our people to do that very quickly is something that's very interesting to me, and I think will be very impactful, just from an artificial intelligence perspective. Everybody's a cyborg, everybody's got a device. So it's happening.
So I was supposed to talk about where office is going, and I came to the conclusion, our team has come to the conclusion that Steve Jobs won. Okay, Steve Jobs beat Bill Gates, the consumer beat the corporate experience, and we're seeing it throughout our lives. And we're seeing office tenants come to us as clients, not as some big monolithic tenant. They're coming to us and saying, why can't I have Nest in the office the way I have it at home? Why can't I have DoorDash come up to our space? Why can't I have a cool place to hang out? Why can't I have this? And it's an interaction that never really existed in the office sector. So our view is you're going to see a continual consolidation between the residential, the retail, the office, and the hotel experience. People are going to want things as easy as possible. We firmly believe that 5G is going to have an amazing effect and change on the world, where you're no longer worried about a laptop. You're going to walk around with your phone that connects to the cloud, that connects to a screen, a wall, a desk. And our challenge is to keep up with that, because there are going to be a lot of haves and a lot of have-nots. And if you don't have the connectivity, if you don't have the fiber networks in place, if you don't have the wireless that can convert ultimately to 5G, I just don't think you can compete. But something positive, because I do have a lot of positive things to say about WeWorks, but the experience is going to matter, and that's what WeWork has proven. And I think you're going to see Macerich have office space, and you're going to see companies like mine have a lot of retail space. I think there's going to be this, and people are going to go for the experience because they want it. They're connected 24/7. The idea that you win in the hierarchy of office life by getting there at 7 in the morning and turning your light on is over, and it's never coming back. So you got to provide experiences, and you got to curate them. So,
Awesome. Great discussion. Thank you all.